crap.
Well, howdy, folks. I'd like to welcome you to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker, the show that dares to ask the question, just what is in my storage locker? The answer today, as most days, is comic books. Yes, because I have bought many comic books in my life, and I probably haven't taken as good care of them as I should have, so, they need to be organized. They need to have bags put on them, and so I go through them for your entertainment, enjoyment, edification, all the above, hopefully. Sometimes my cat intrudes upon the show. He actually has settled down. I record these in usually two at a sitting, and he only broke in at the very beginning of the last episode, so I don't know. It's maybe a little bit here is when he wakes up in the middle of the night, but we're going to see now, aren't we? All right. So you know the drill. I start out with a fat stack of comics. If we're lucky, I get through 5 or 6 of them. All right, so what was on top of the pile here? Birds of Prey #1 from February '98. Now, this was not the first issue of the Birds of Prey. They had sort of tested the concept out with a number of one-shots. Maybe they had a limited series, I'm trying to remember. But basically, they didn't get their first series until they had already been sort of proven. They had a track record. People wanted more Birds of Prey, so they finally, they put the book out. And what you see here on this is more or less the nucleus, the core of the Birds of Prey, through more or less till today. You're not going to have a team of Birds of Prey without at least one of these women on it. Oftentimes both of them, Black Canary, Batgirl. The third, part of the trio is Huntress. I think she came in a little bit later, but she's had the most time on the team besides these three. And then after that, it's sort of a rotating roster through the years. I don't think I bought the whole Chuck Dixon run here, but I always kind of liked the Birds of Prey. The new series with Kelly Thompson and Leonardo Romero is excellent. 2 issues into it as of this this video. So if you're in a store and you're looking for something good that you might like that's in the new comic department, highly recommend that one. All right, so first issue, giant first issue. It's like, twice as big as a regular comic. Now, slightly controversial creative team. Chuck Dixon, who you know, he was the earliest writer of the Birds of Prey. He's the guy who put these characters together, I believe. And Greg Land, Drew Garassi as well. He actually has a YouTube show as well. I've seen a couple of those episodes. They're pretty good. But covered by Gary Frank, that is probably reason enough for me to buy it. I think I say as much every issue. His work was enough to get me to buy. Just his cover was often enough to get me to buy a comic. But I would have been excited for this too, because I was following the Bat books at the time. Generally liked Chuck Dixon's writing. And I liked Greg Land's penciling. Now, the important thing to remember is that the Greg Land of 1998 is not the Greg Land of 2023. As I think you'll see, if you just look through the book here, like, wait a minute, that looks pretty decent. It's not, there's not a whole bunch of, maybe there is more photo reference than I can tell, but just that alone should tell you. It doesn't, jump out to me. Oh, there's a Spawn video game, Spawn the Eternal. It's already PlayStation, so I didn't do the PlayStation. And you see, this is a nice looking comic. It's not too, it's not, extraordinarily exploitive. They're going up against the Batman C list, which was pretty much sort of where the Birds of Prey were at for a while here. Interactive world of the X-Files. Now you're probably thinking, wait a minute. How is Batgirl jumping around? This is 1998. Batgirl wasn't jumping around in 1998. She was Oracle, who, in hindsight, was in some ways as popular as her as Batgirl. And I don't know. There's a trade-off there. They lost a very valuable asset with Oracle. I don't know if what they've gained with having her back as Batgirl, but certainly not the first person to have that conversation, and I know I will not be the last person to have that conversation either. But yeah, you can see why. Like, this is a nice looking book. Everyone's more or less on model. But, and especially when he went to CrossGen, the first books he did for CrossGen, there's this book called Sojourn, which every now and again Marvel put out something with the CrossGen characters. It's not taboo like it is with the Ultraverse. Just, I think, last year they put out a reprint book with some early CrossGen in it. But they're not characters that have a huge following. So, every now and again, like, you'll get a Ruse series. They may still do some Ruse at some point. That was Mark Waid's big book. But they've never gone back to Sojourn, which kind of surprises me, because Greg Land is still a mainstay for the line. And if they wanted to do a new Sojourn series with him and Greg Land on it, they might actually get, that's like one property that people might get excited about seeing Greg Land on, but he's still on all the books, and he's not, he's a bit questionable, shall we say. I certainly don't necessarily care for him now. And this is Spellbinder, the Spellbinder who first appeared in the... I don't know if she first appeared in Underworld Uprising. Maybe she appeared... Maybe that wasn't her first appearance, but that was the one where she got her powers upgraded by Neron during that. And this is an illusion. You probably were expecting something like that since this was a 1998 comic book. And she has to escape from her confines, crawl her way to the wheelchair, which was actually something she had to do quite a bit in Birds of Prey, because any villains that got around to Barbara Gordon, they would always underestimate her and forget that she could kick your ass even outside of the wheelchair, and without the use of her legs, she could probably put you in the hospital. She's a cool cat. So, this is more or less where you're at here. Barbara Gordon and Black Canary, and the friendship between those two women. Watch your hands, Harvey. Jesus. Oh, and this is another of the long-term effects from... Actually, some of the character revamps they did after Underworld. I want to say Underworld Uprising. Was that the name of it? If I got it wrong, I'm putting it on the screen now. And if I got it right, I'm not, so we'll see. But this guy here, Blockbuster, he got a big push because his big deal was when Neron came to him, he was sort of maybe a little bit smarter than the Hulk, but basically Neron was like, I can, give you a wish in exchange for your soul. And because Blockbuster was not smart at the time, he said, well, I want to be smart. And so he became a mastermind, and he was big nemesis for the first few years of the Nightwing book. I don't actually know if he got his super intelligence taken away. If I had to guess, he probably did. That seems like something that they would have done in the New 52. Birds of Prey, they're popular. I should probably put a backing board on that #1. All right. So, Greg Land wasn't always Greg Land. That's all I can tell you in terms of Having once been a fan. But then even towards the end of that Sojourn book, like I say, you know, he was already starting to lean a bit heavily onto that photo reference. All right, Howard the Duck, number 33. Oh boy. Now, this comic requires a little bit of explanation because this is a weird issue. Not a lot of people remember it because it's like any Howard the Duck story, not written by Steve Gerber. It sort of exists in a limbo, shall we speak. It's not what fans of the character want because real Howard fans know that any Howard that isn't written by Steve Gerber, immediately suspect. Even to this day, after he died, and they've had a couple, well-regarded Howard the Duck stories, it's not the same thing. It doesn't feel right if it's anyone but Steve Gerber's voice coming out of it. But the thing is 1986, it's kind of a big year for Howard. He had a movie out. Now, we know now, of course, that the Howard the Duck movie is one of the most famous flops in the history of Hollywood. But Marvel didn't know that at the time. The lead time for comic books was such that they ended up putting out comic book tie-ins for movies that didn't do well, just as much as they did movies that did do well. So Howard the Duck needed a new book on the stand since Howard the Duck had a new movie in theaters. So, and see, look at the back cover here. More adventure than humanly possible, coming to Earth this summer. And this was cover dated oh, hello. I was just telling the nice people about you and saying that you were sort of quiescent for the last video, but I guess you've come to give us a visit. No, you don't get to pull the microphone down. Oh, you are such a problematic fellow. So problematic. All right. So they put out an issue of Howard the Duck that had nothing to do with Steve Gerber. Even though I should point out that Steve Gerber, oh, come on, guy. There weren't what you'd call a lot of hard feelings about the movie, at least to begin with. He was on board for it, and I believe he almost went to the set, but apparently he just, don't knock those over. He just couldn't make it work with his schedule, I want to say. And of course, afterwards, it was something he could laugh about, I think. But he had also sued the company. So I've always been a little bit surprised by the fact that he ended up coming back and doing a lot of work for them. Oh, come on, guy. He came back and did a lot of work for them in the late 80s and early 90s. But he did not write this comic. Now, of course, one thing about this comic, maybe it, not completely worthless. It's got a Brian Bolland cover. He was not doing a lot of Marvel work at the time. So him coming and doing this cover for them is the most special thing about it. There's a little text page up here where they talk about the process of putting together an additional episode or an additional issue of Howard. Now, they put out another issue at 32. I think they only did those couple, sort of weird one-off issues that still had the same numbering of the original book, because the original Howard was in the 70s, so them just doing another, issue 33 of that running, and I think they did it at 32 as well, but I don't have it. Because, like I say, non-Gerber Howard, not... and there's, come on. There's even a bit in this text page in the back talking about putting this issue together and how, well, if Howard the Duck does well, we'll see more Howard the Duck. Well, guess what? Howard the Duck did not do well, so they weren't exactly running out to put more appearances of it. Come on! This is only so funny. At a certain point, it's just annoying, and I'll probably cut this out. Well, as it is, I'm going to put up the Roger attack graphic that I put up in some of the episodes of the Udder Madness. All right, so sort of an off-brand creative team. Val Mayerick, who I think had some, maybe drawn Hulk Howard before, I'm not quite sure, but Christopher Stager, who I just straight up do not know his name. But the one thing about this is that this guy was apparently someone who would work with Gerber. Oh, come on. If you wanted to just sit up in the corner of the table there, but you're not going to do that. You're going to start, you can't just sit there. You're going to start tearing everything down. Oh, my goodness. I played with him for like 45 minutes before I sat down to record these videos. He's just sitting on a box now. Let's see. I don't recognize so what this ends up being is it's a little bit, I remember this one. It's not a terrible story because it's basically like he wins the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. So he spends all issue hanging around Ed McMahon. And it's just weird enough that it's kind of interesting because it's kind of like this guy knew Gerber enough to know that if he was going to do his own Howard the Duck story, it'd have to just be kind of weird in its own way. And yeah, this isn't like a Steve Gerber story, but this isn't a Steve Gerber story, but it's weird enough that you at least respect it for trying, for not just doing some carbon copy of Steve Gerber. But they got a couple of letters from. But the one thing that you read in this, and I got to respect this guy because this was, I think, oh wait, no, this wasn't written by, this was written by undoubtedly the editor. But they say, like, the first person who they thought to get to write a new Howard the Duck story, if it wasn't going to be Steve Gerber, was Harvey Pekar. And you read this, and it says that he actually got so far as to ask him. And he would have said yes if he hadn't been busy, because he was working on the apparently at this exact moment, he was working on the publication of one of the American Splendor Trades, which, not a book you get name dropped in a Marvel book very often, but apparently, and he did he did a tour for that, I think at least, David Letterman. So he was busy with his own Hollywood journey, you could say, at the time. But we came that close to actually having a Harvey Pekar Howard the Duck story. Later on, Harvey Pekar did end up, his one single Marvel credit was he did a Thing story. I forget what it was in. It was in, they had a series of like, one of the things they did after 2000 when Joe Quesada took over is they did I forget what it was. I'll put it up on screen where it was. But he did a quick Thing story, and it was kind of nice. He got the Thing's voice really, really good, even in just a couple pages you could see. But he didn't have any other credits, I don't believe. But man, how cool would that have been? How cool. Because, Howard is the most famous Marvel character who, he isn't in Cleveland nowadays. I think he spends most of his time in New York hanging out with She-Hulk. But for years at least, he was a resident. I believe he was also a cab driver for a while in Cleveland. What do we got here? Oh, goodness. Fantastic Four 245. This comic, it looks like junk because I never paid more than like 50 cents for an issue of the John Byrne run of the Fantastic Four. I think I paid maybe $1 for a few of them at some point, but most of the run I was able to put together in either quarter boxes or a couple trades. When I was, not that long after it came out, and in hindsight, it seemed forever ago when I was a kid. But yeah, this was, if you were a Fantastic Four fan, when I was growing up, this was the this was the wellspring. This was the big run that had sort of reoriented the team in the 80s after, it had been in a rut for a long while. And of course, I like the Steve Englehart run. It's not going to get most people's votes for favorite Fantastic Four run, but he was trying at least to do some interesting things. The Walt Simonson run, very good. It should have been a lot longer than it was. It's one of the great tragedies of that period of Marvel that it was apparently just a misunderstanding on a couple of levels, I believe, that it was as short as it was. But then Tom DeFalco and Paul Ryan showed up, and I like their run. I know it's not the most popular Fantastic Four run, but I've noticed that it's gotten some boosters in the last few years. People are going back and realizing, hey, this wasn't a completely incompetent run of comics. They actually did interesting things with the characters. Oh, this is after G.I. Joe, the 3 3/4 inch, 1982, after the 3 3/4 inch figures had already launched. So, this is 80s Marvel sort of starting to come into its own, because you get John Byrne taking over Fantastic Four after he leaves X-Men. G.I. Joe's already creeping in, and that was, along with X-Men, G.I. Joe and X-Men were their creative juggernauts consistently across that whole decade. This was, I want to say, a big solo spotlight for the Invisible. Well, let's see, this I think was the issue where she came out and, or is she? See, I'm trying to remember if this is, I don't know if this is the issue where, I'd have to reread it, where she switches from the Invisible Girl to the Invisible Woman. But basically, she has to fight. I think that's like some future psychic projection of Franklin. So it's basically her against, her son, who is one of the most powerful mutants in the history of the world, which supposedly he's not a mutant, but I don't think that's going to stick around for very long. That was something that is just not probably a lot of creators are going to have any interest, because him being a mutant was the source of so many interesting stories. And you don't gain anything other than not having to write him. I mean, the one thing it did is it meant that Franklin Richards didn't have to be involved in Krakoa, which is probably all that Dan Slott cared about when he introduced that little plot twist. But I can't imagine. It's kind of like Magneto's children being Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch. That's going to go back. That can't, that's too essential to the... Oh, but he had been, for the first part of Byrne's run, he had been sort of transformed back to his early, less strong, sort of leathery, like sort of orange alligator skin form. And he puts him back in the rocks. Yep. And they're talking about the G.I. Joe television commercial, which is what got the whole ball rolling. They did a number of television commercials for the G.I. Joe comic book. And it didn't stick around. They didn't start doing ads for other Marvel books, even though if they did, they saw, this got kids into stores. It got them to start buying comics. And there's a lot of people walking the earth today, maybe even watching this video, who started the habit of buying comics because they were watching a television commercial that told them to go march down to 7-Eleven and get the G.I. Joe book. It's the thing. It's the happening. And they repeated it with the Transformers. They sold a lot of Transformers comics as well. And they repeated it with a lot of other books that maybe didn't do quite as well, like Animax and the Air Raiders and the Dino Riders. Ugh. I bought Dino Riders because it had dinosaurs on it, but man, it was, well, I was a kid. That's the only excuse I can offer for you. What's next? Oh, here's a fun one. from 1989, the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, update 89. There were 3 Marvel Universe series in the 80s. In the early 80s, they started off with the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. And then just a couple months after they finished the first handbook of the Marvel Universe, they went and did the Marvel Universe Deluxe Edition, which ran for 20 issues. I think the first one only ran for 12. And then they did the Update 89, which only ran for 8 issues, but they were all these giant size issues. And then a couple years after that, they did the Master Edition, which is frankly where a lot of people got off the ride, because these books sold well. They wouldn't have done them unless they didn't sell well. But people didn't want those binder pages. I stayed with the binder pages for a while, but after a while, even I was just like, what am I getting out of these? They're not giving, they were a lot more similar to the index type stuff, because they didn't have any of the, they didn't have the histories. They had key issues. That was a little bit interesting, but they could have done key issues and incorporated them into this format. This format was what people loved. And when they've gone back and done the handbooks in subsequent years, that's been the format that they've replicated. They've not done the binder pages again. Thank goodness. Thank goodness for that. They all had wraparound covers by Ron Friends with all the characters. And you were going to get covered in this book if you had some sort of change, major change since the last handbook, if you premiered since the last handbook, or one of the big changes for this was that the previous handbooks hadn't done non-powered supporting characters. Whereas this, they said, okay, we're going to do non-powered supporting characters for the Update 89. So this is the first time that, like, Foggy Nelson, Mary Jane had their first in their first entries. So yeah, fun stuff. And I was buying this. This was like the first summer, not the first summer that I was ever buying Marvels, period. But when I really started to get into Marvel superhero books, these were on the shelves. And I just ate these up. Just loved them. Absolutely. Just poured over these. I've read all of this multiple times. And of course, the best thing about the Marvel Universe books, the reason why they're interesting to flip through, even if you're not a fan of all this stuff, is they got fun people to do the entries. And another of the appeals that this volume had was that typically for the old series, all the other pictures, the profile pictures were new, but all the other pictures were from the archives. Whereas for this, all of the entries were new material. And you'd usually get creators who were familiar with, associated with the characters, like this first one for the original Human Torch, because he'd had a lot of changes. John Byrne brought him back in Avengers West Coast 50 and erased any connection to the Vision. But eventually that was kind of undone by Kurt Busiek and Carlos Pacheco in the Avengers Forever series, where they sort of had their cake and ate it too, because they recognized that there were a lot of problems with the John Byrne retcon. It needed to be massaged a bit, but at the same time, people kind of liked having the original Human Torch back, so they had to make those two. They had to make those two origins jibe, and how they did that was Immortus was up to his old tricks. Hyperion, this entry, and there's a lot to add here, because this is after the Squadron Supreme limited series, which is, more or less still to this day, the big Squadron Supreme story. There were some, I will say, there were some interesting parts of J. Michael Straczynski's Supreme Power. I didn't hate it. I liked the Gary Frank art. I think I've probably already, usually can't get through one of these episodes without mentioning Gary Frank. So maybe you didn't realize until now just how much I really like Gary Frank. But yeah, I really like Gary Frank. But at least up until Supreme Power, you know, Mark Grunwald's 12-issue series, mostly with Paul Ryan, although there are a couple other artists in there, is the defining Squadron Supreme story. And then after this, they did the Death of the Universe, which was sort of the Squadron Supreme's version of Crisis on Infinite Earths. And after that, they end up coming and staying on the regular 616 for a while in the pages of Quasar. And Infectia, she was an X-Factor villain created by Walt Simonson, who's doing this entry. And the interesting thing about it, well, interesting, quote unquote, is basically she shows up and she wears the tiniest mini skirts. That's pretty much every time she shows up. It's like, hey, Walt Simonson, what did you feel like drawing today? She just appeared again. I think she was, I want to say maybe she was dead or depowered for a while, but I saw her again recently in the Dark X-Men book, in one of the Aftermath of Krakoa books. This is the Iron Fist, and drawn by Dave Cockrum, who had a history drawing the early Iron Fist stories. Now, they put him in the regular series because since the original deluxe edition, he had supposedly died in the last issue of Power Man and Iron Fist. But I'm going to point out here that they didn't even bother putting him in the deceased section. There's only one deceased character in the Marvel Universe Update 89, and it's Madeline Pryor. They don't even bother putting Iron Fist in the deceased because that last story was written very obviously in such a way to open the door for, you know, whoever wanted to bring him back in the future. So they're not even like keeping up the pretense that he's dead for real. They're just like, Daniel Rand was allegedly buried thereafter, but whether or not Daniel Rand is indeed truly dead remains to be seen. Meaning, I mean, this is the 89. People were already, you know, his return was already, it wouldn't be until John Byrne did it in Namor, but that was just, you know, a year or so down the line, 2 years. Iron Man, he had the big armor wars, so that he had changed armors and had a huge status change because, you know, he went after everyone who tried to steal his armor, and then he got shot in the last, I don't know, like issue 240 or so he got shot. Then he was in a wheelchair for like a few years, and then he had a weird surgery that restored his ability to walk, but ended up making his body, the Mars twins who were villains. Okay, I'm just getting into the weeds here. Basically, he was paralyzed for years, and then he had a degenerative spinal problem until, like, I think it was like, he didn't get that fixed until like 290, until he was up and walking around again. So he had health problems. He had serious health problems. And then right after that, he fell off the wagon again due to his body being taken over by an evil computer program, I think. So, you know, Iron Man, he just needs to suffer. That's his whole purpose as a character, is to be a rich guy who gets to suffer the what is the old phrase I'm searching for? The trials of Job. That's Bob Clayton. That's Bob Layton, although that's an Elliot R. Brown diagram, if ever there was one. So you get to see all the fakey science there. The Jade Dragon, who was an Alpha Flight villain, who did that? That was Mark McLaurin. I actually, I wasn't buying Alpha Flight at the time, but like in the early 2000s, I put together a complete run of Alpha Flight from the quarter box. So I have read all of the Alpha Flight that has ever been. Don't remember that much about the later run of it, though. Here's Edwin Jarvis. So this would have been his first Keith Pollard. Oh, wait, no. No, I was wrong. Jade Dragon was Vince McClurg. Edwin Jarvis was Mark McLaren. I'm sorry. And Gabe Jones was Keith Pollard. He was one of the Howlers, who is, he's all the way back to the Silver Age. Lee and Kirby, Sergeant Fury's Howling Commandos #1, but then he became a SHIELD dude. And this is Jubilee's first appearance in Handbook, which this should tell you how far back this was. Jubilee didn't even have a costume. This is back in the very, very first year of her appearance when she was literally just, and this is totally in character for her, just basically stole a bunch of costume items because she's wearing Storm's vest, one of the Dazzler's swimsuits, Rogue's boots, and I want to say that's Longshot's pouch of weapons. So she is just starting as a character, but I'm sure they knew that she has that absolutely awful haircut. Who drew that? That was Jim Fern. Maybe he drew, I want to say maybe he drew that first Jubilee solo story in that X-Men annual. Kala, who, not a character who has, I'd be surprised if she's appeared since this, because she was from the old Tales of Suspense days. Maybe they needed to fill a page count. And Kalu. He was a Doctor Strange enemy back in the days of the first run of Strange Tales. And then he came back for, I think, the early run of like the 1988 Doctor Strange book, I want to say. Don't quote me on that. And then he has actually appeared since then. Believe it or not, he actually was on, I want to say he was on a team in the Avengers. So people got some use out of him. And here's Killraven. Now the interesting thing here is they got P. Craig Russell do the Killraven entry. And this entry absolutely fascinated me, because the thing is this is all like Marvel Universe characters. And then you have Killraven, who is, he's a part of the Marvel multiverse, but he's not from the 616. He's tied in. He's met characters, and I think he's even spent some time, I want to say he actually spent some time as a barista in New York. But he comes from an alternate future, which is, I think, the same alternate future that the Guardians of the Galaxy are from, which is taken over by the Martians from the War of the Worlds. Like straight up to H.G. Wells, aliens conquered an alternate universe, and this is the year 2000 AD, 2001 AD in that universe. And P. Craig Russell, I don't think he invented created the character, but he was the main artist, and that was sort of the run that made P. Craig Russell a name to be reckoned with. So it's actually kind of cool, because he had already moved on from Marvel, and was doing a lot of stuff at this point. But he came back to do the. He had long hair in the past, but he gave him sort of a updated haircut. Oh, because he did I'm forgetting this. P. Craig Russell went back and did a Killraven graphic novel, completely for spacing out. So he did have some association with the character. He's still alive. They should do some more Killraven. They don't do Killraven very often. Joseph Michael Linsner did some Killraven. And then Killraven's Freeman, who was basically his little group of freedom fighters. Cubic, now this, 4 pages about this guy who started out as a cosmic cube. Now, I read this, and I even have specific memories of reading this entry over and over and over again, trying to understand, because this is sort of like a skeleton key to a lot of really important stuff in Marvel, because this is basically a history of the cosmic cubes in the Marvel Universe right here. And so I went back and I read all of the issues that are discussed here, so I could follow this specific cosmic lineage that goes through, goes through the Avengers, goes through Captain America, goes through Fantastic Four, goes through, and then leads up to, every now and again. He's not a cosmic entity that you see very often, but even still to this day, he'll still show up and stuff. Steve Englehart made a lot of use of him. Kunlun, that's, I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, Kunlun. That's actually, Iron Fist. He's had a very good, and this is Elliot R. Brown again. He's had a good 21st century. He's had a couple memorable runs. There was the, I'm totally spacing on it. Ed Brubaker did the run that sort of revamped him for the 21st century. Kare Andrews had a well-regarded but brief run. I've just never cared for martial arts characters as general. I like Shang-Chi. Okay. But Iron Fist, I just never really did anything for me. Leech by Rob Liefeld. Oh man, if you play Snap, you hate this guy. You hate this guy. You don't want to see him show up because he just scotches your entire hand. Whatever you were planning on doing it, well, sorry. Leech is in town, buddy. And that's kind of what he does. Betty Brant, she was a supporting character, so this was her first entry. Really nice looking pen and ink drawing by Sal Buscema here. When he was doing his really elaborate pen and ink shading for, he had a couple periods on Spectacular. Part of it he was doing this really intricate hatching, and then later on he got a lot more into spotted blacks. They don't talk about it a lot because not a lot of people pay attention to Sal Buscema. But he learned something from Mike Mignola and Frank Miller. He was paying attention to those guys, and you could really see it on like the last third or so of his Spectacular Spider-Man. All right, left winger. He was one of many punching bags for the new Captain America. When they replaced Captain America with the character who would be U.S. agent for a while. One of the things that Mark Gruenwald did during that storyline was, and this would, I don't know how this would go over today, but one of the hallmarks of the John Walker run of Captain America is he went up against right-wing domestic terrorists. That was a big focus of that part of Gruenwald's tenure on the book. And this guy was, he'd gone through the power broker process. So he was, this whole thing was kind of about the political climate in the late 80s, so to speak. So, Mark Gruenwald was a lefty. So you tell me where those stories come down. They'd have a definite viewpoint. Ronald Reagan is a giant lizard in one of them. So that was Kieran Dwyer because he was the writer for a lot of those books. Lear from the Celtic heroes, the Celtic pantheon, who were they were big in Thor around this time. No one else has ever used them. I don't even think Al Ewing has touched the Celtic pantheon. Probably because a lot of people don't know about the Celtic pantheon. But they were kind of, I want to say they may even have been Tom DeFalco's creation because they really only appeared during his Thor. But, the whole god pantheon, the Celtic gods of Avalon, that's never really been utilized by anyone in Marvel. So, they're there for the taking. Whole pantheon that could be used. The Lobo brothers, who were a big thing for a while in Spectacular Spider-Man, but I don't think ever appeared after them. The Living Mummy and Cantu. Carrie Gamble, there's an old Marvel hand for you. Willie Lumpkin, another supporting character premiering here. That was Rich Howell. He did a fair amount of Marvel at this time. Al McKenzie, who was a S.H.I.E.L.D. guy who did not particularly stay on to be one of the S.H.I.E.L.D. mainstays. It's kind of funny. Not a lot of the S.H.I.E.L.D. You got Nick Fury, you got the Countess, and Gabe shows up now and again. G.W. Bridge, believe it or not, the character from X-Force, he stuck around. Al McKenzie, he did not stick around for S.H.I.E.L.D. Moira McTaggart by Keith Pollard. Now, you want to talk about if they do another, and of course I'm sure they will someday do another official handbook. It's probably about time for them to do another one. They haven't done one since, like, I want to say the late 2000s. Hers would be a lot longer now. This was before even the Muir Isle saga, so they don't say anything about, oh, and she's dressing like a weirdo. Madam Hydra by Paul Neary. Oh, that's a nice Madam Hydra. Yeah, Paul Neary. He was doing a lot of special projects with his, I want to say it looked like an airbrush style. Very distinctive. He did a couple Iron Man spotlights for Marvel Fanfare. He did a couple deluxe books for DC. Madam Web, this was John Romita Jr. She was actually from his run of John Romita Jr. He hadn't drawn her in years by this time, but so it doesn't look like his Daredevil work. It looks a little bit more like his work when he was on Spider-Man. Artie Maddox, who was Leach's best buddy here, they hung out together when they were hanging around X Factor. Another Rob Liefeld. Madripoor, oh goodness, because Chris Claremont, when he had this whole side continuity of this Southeast Asian island that was sort of like Singapore with the serial number filed off. Sort of like very redolent of Terry and the Pirates, like extraordinarily relevant of Terry and the Pirates. Kind of him and John Buscema just going off into their own corner of the Marvel Universe and doing Terry and the Pirates. And no one really understood at the time or now why that was his big push for solo Wolverine. Was, hey, let's do Terry and the Pirates with Wolverine. So not a lot of people have used these characters. They use Madripoor. They don't go out of their way to use, like the Princess Bar. How often does the Princess Bar appear in books that Chris Claremont doesn't write? I'm sure it's happened. Blood Scream and Rough House. Actually, those are fun characters. They don't appear very often. None of these guys do. But, Jessica Drew was hanging out there for a while. Amal Farouk, the Shadow King, he was possessed Karma. Actually, Madame Joy, who is listed as a Madam. Maison Alpha, is, because it's, of course, Canada, so it's all the signage is in French. And Mannequin. I love this guy. And, of course, I went back and, read the Alpha Flight this guy is in, and years later, and he is nowhere near as cool. Like this, he has a weird, really cool power to split himself into three, like protoplasm, caveman, future guy. And you think, wow, that's a really cool power. I'll bet Mannequin does a lot of cool stuff. No, Mannequin does not do any cool things, ever. And he never appears. I'll say never. He may have appeared in like a Civil War backup or something at some point, but no one's ever done anything to speak of with this kid again. And I love this entry. Like, this entry makes you think, wow, this guy is cool. And then you get out into the wider Marvel Universe and it's just not there. And here's data corrections from the first. They took all of this seriously. They took the handbook seriously, which is why, one of these days they need to do another. And now it's all online, and they may think, oh, we don't need to do one because it's all online. But I don't, you still got to put it in, black and white now and again. I'll volunteer for that. You need someone to do that? I'll write those for you. I know a couple of the handbook people online. And wow, that ate up a fair amount of the hour. But I think we still have time for one more book on top of all of that. Let's see here. How about what are you? Superman Annual number 9 from 1997. This is the Pulp Heroes theme here. They stopped doing crossovers. I guess they figured out the crossovers weren't that popular because, or they were, losing their juice. So they went over to more loose theme years. They had a Elseworlds year, they had a year 1 year. They had one that I don't think people cared for that much, Legends of the Dead Earth, which was sort of like far future sci-fi versions, which kind of specific, and not every hero was able to really get a good get a good hook for that. But this was Pulp Heroes, so even though it was regular, present day, present continuity adventures of the heroes, they all sort of had a throwback feel in terms of, like, I talked about the Batman one on the TikTok channel not that long ago, and it was like it had a flashback to Enemy Ace and like World War I aviation. And so this one is a pulp adventure story. Dan Jurgens, Sean Chen, Brett Breeding. Sean Chen is someone who I always liked his stuff when I saw him. I don't know what happened to him. It seemed like he could have been bigger. That's a nice. That would have been, I think, the earliest hardcover appearance of Kingdom Come. The graffiti, they used to do these really nice hardcovers when the companies themselves weren't doing them. But eventually the company sort of started doing that stuff in-house. But if, these graffiti editions of the early series like Kingdom Come, I know they did a Crisis one. I think they're still worth some cash because they were really nice. You got some like evil monastery in the Himalayas or something. I don't know, even by the 90s maybe. Maybe the evil mystic, Orient was a little bit past its sell-by at this point. But, there's Bibbo. I think that's Bibbo. Jimmy Olsen. And this is when Superman was doing his electric phase. So you have electric Superman doing pulp adventures. There's your high concept. And you see, it didn't look bad. That I've said before, the electric stuff wasn't as bad as its reputation. The problem was, you do 52 issues, over 52 issues of Superman every year. You're going to need to change things up. You're going to need new ideas. So they did a year where he had different powers. In hindsight, if they didn't do it, someone else would have done it. And we're about ready for them to do a nostalgic throwback to that. That's just how it works. Doom 64, only the N64 could handle this game. But, Doom had been around for years, so I don't remember this N64 version really, making a lot of waves. But, it's Jimmy and Bibbo. They're doing something or other. Always like Bibbo. I don't think he shows up much anymore, but man, you put Bibbo in a comic, you get like a bunch of 30 and 40 somethings that get really excited. It's like, oh, it's Bibbo. Yes. He's going to the fictional country of Butran. That's traveling with Bibbo. And, it's some Jimmy Olsen doppelganger with a giant tattoo on his chest. What was up with the ad campaigns in the 90s? Like, we need to sell a soda pop. What do we do? Well, how about this stock photo of Albert Einstein that everyone's seen 1,000 times? Even in 1997, everyone had already seen this 1,000 times. Okay. Fine. Someone got paid just as much money to make that ad. So he's going off and having weird adventures with, a cult in the Himalayas of some kind. Driving a weird gyroscope. There's probably a name for that. But it's a very, Doc Savage touch right there, to be completely fair. This looks kind of fun. Good art, fun adventure with, Lois and Bibbo and Jimmy. He drew a good Lois. They're trapped in a shark cage. That's very old school right there. Oh, I forgot Professor Hamilton's there too. And the interesting, if I remember, one of the interesting hooks from this year's Superman was he could be Clark Kent, but if he was Clark Kent, he didn't have any powers. He was just more or less a normal human being, you know, or at least a Kryptonian without any special powers. Oh, goodness. Did he get his arm bit? Oh, that's right. He already had a robot arm by that point. That's right. That's right. See, this is good stuff. I remember his Iron Man is probably his most high profile run at Marvel, at least. He did a run on Elektra. I remember that being interesting because he said at the time, like, yeah, I don't really think of myself as like a babe artist, so to speak, you know, and that's kind of the direction they always go with Elektra. But his Elektra was pretty good. He drew just about everything really well, I thought. I don't know what became of him. I'm sure it's real easy to find out if I'm not actually recording a video. Tang crossover with Mad. Yeah, they're still pushing it. They still sell Tang. They still sell Tang. I don't know who drinks it. Last I checked, it's still in the store. Not that I'm checking very often. What are they doing? Oh, they're getting rid. He's got some big... I have no idea what's going on in this comic, but it's some giant monster he's got to fight. And there's your wise Asian guy to come in and wrap everything up with some exposition. The Ultimate Batman Collection. There you go. The first 3 movies. This is before Batman and Robin. Free theatrical. All 4 theatrical Batman movie posters free mail-in offer. That actually would have been kind of cool. I'm sure they weren't like full-size posters, but for those who bought that on VHS. And they even have a mail letters page. I wish, you know, the one thing I wish is that DC didn't go in for the backups. Marvel, they really went into backups, and that was my favorite part of the Marvel annuals. And even why I bought annuals when they weren't that great was because there'd usually be something fun in there, and there'd be the kind of features, like humor features or pinup features that you wouldn't see in just, you know, the normal, you know, monthly book. But DC, they put that stuff more in the, they had the Secret Files line. Daryl Banks on Parallax's body. Do I recognize any of the names of this? Sometimes you see a name you recognize here. Joanna Cates. I almost said Johnny Cates. And Glen Orbick cover, it says. Oh, and you're here just in time for me to say goodbye. Isn't that right? Well, yeah, pay attention to me. All right. Well, I think it was the issue of the Marvel Universe that really got to us. But, you know, we got through 5. Oh, boy. We got through 5 books. Well, we laughed. We learned all that good stuff. The cat disrupted everything. Are we still going here? Say goodbye, Roger.